Hi there, I'm Amy Miller, hopping on live today. Have you ever thought about why television scenes will often, especially comedy, will feel so emotionally satisfying? It is because people are saying things that a lot of times in real life we don't say. We often suppress what it is we really mean, what it is we really think. And as a child, I remember really loving sitcom family dynamics because the characters openly discussed tension and conflict was addressed directly. People would be able to express their frustration and everyone had a voice. And I loved that. It wasn't like that in my household. And I was a very direct person and I just somehow instinctively knew we need to address the problem, the tension. This way we can work through it. But I was alone in that. And I think a lot of times, yeah, in real life, we're not saying what it is we really think. And what happens is the discomfort doesn't then get resolved. We instead hold it internally. And this is what happens in real life. And a lot of times at work, we do when we do the opposite. Maybe instead of saying directly saying what it is we want to say, we might soften, we might over explain, sort of seeking reassurance. We might hint at something, or we might suppress our genuine reaction. And sometimes we just avoid the difficult conversations altogether. And what we think we're doing is prioritizing emotional safety over the honest communication. But we end up doing the opposite. We don't actually feel emotionally safe when we feel like we can't say what it is we really think, we can't share our ideas. We don't then feel emotionally safe. And this can create a lot of challenges in life and also at work. We'll have these interactions, but we're not having the real conversation that needs to happen. And when communication isn't fully expressed, when we don't say what it is we mean and we're holding it in, the nervous system is still carrying this conversation. There's lots of different ideas and terms and research supporting this in organizational psychology. One is surface acting, when what we're showing on our face is not how we are actually feeling. And also, emotional labor. This is when we're carrying around the emotions of how we're feeling, but what we're not saying, or maybe we're worried about what the other person is, how they're going to feel. So we're carrying that emotional labor as well. And then this it creates internal conflict when this unspoken, unresolved tension. And then we carry this as a distraction when we're trying to focus on the work at hand. So how many times have you had either an undesired outcome or a conversation that didn't go the way you wanted it to go? You've got a conflict with someone either at work or at home, and you're trying to focus on your work, but this distraction keeps pulling your focus. This is called attention residue, or I'm sorry, it's called emotional residue. So we're trying to focus at the task at hand, but our focus is actually being pulled in another direction. So if you've experienced this before, you likely notice maybe you sit down and should be able to get a lot done in that 2 hour block for your special project, but it's taking you 4 hours and you're not really getting very far. So these are the kinds of challenges that can happen when we are dealing with unresolved tension. And when it goes unresolved for a long time or a certain amount of time, this can even lead to resentment. Not a very good feeling. So what do we, well, before we talk about, I'm going to share in a little bit some solutions, some tools that you can use and put into action today, both in your work life and or in your personal life, that can help you as a support tool in dealing with emotional or unresolved tension before it goes on for too long. So we'll get into that. But first, let's look at some examples, because people feel the tension. Like I mentioned, we think that we're protecting ourselves emotionally and maybe others emotionally by not saying what it is we really think. But people feel this. I've heard many times when someone is a professional is looking to make a career transition, why they're looking is they'll say that the writing was on the wall. So maybe nobody spoke about the impending layoffs or the changes that were coming, but we feel the tension. We feel it. And a lot of times middle managers are sort of caught in between communication from executive leadership and then their frontline teams. And so it's their job to sort of hold that tension and inform in a way that's going to continue to motivate their teams, but they're holding this unspoken tension, and that can show up as challenges as well. Or sometimes it's a peer tension. So within a team where there's a challenge that hasn't gotten resolved, there's a challenged dynamic or communication that needs to happen, or maybe you notice somebody's a little quieter than they normally are on the team. We feel that. So we feel this unresolved tension. So we're carrying it with us. We're not actually protecting ourselves or the other people involved emotionally. So we often think that we're protecting relationships by not openly sharing what it is we really need to say, having those tough conversations. But what we're doing when we don't feel comfortable saying exactly what we need to say, perfectly or imperfectly, we're creating a rift there and a gap that's just going to get bigger and bigger in that relationship. So unresolved tension is going to change the relationship dynamic anyway. So we might as well communicate, even though it's not easy. And there's a lot of conversation around psychological safety, Amy Edmondson's research, and she talks about how when teams feel comfortable she talks about psychological safety being when teams feel comfortable to speak up, to share their ideas, to even push back, to point out we made a mistake here, and this way the team can foster innovation and realize solutions faster. But when we're afraid to speak up and push back and or have that difficult conversation because we want to be nice and we don't want to bring up any challenges, well, that's not psychological safety. Psychological safety doesn't mean that we always agree, and it doesn't mean that we save face and keep things even keel. It means we're comfortable having those challenging conversations. We're comfortable communicating what needs to be said, what we actually feel. And Daniel Goleman talks about amygdala hijacking, and this is it helps to explain why we have challenges sort of finding our words or saying what we really want to say in the heat of the moment, because we start operating from the part of our brain that is emotionally reactive. And I'm going to talk about a simple process that takes just about 30 seconds that you can use moving forward when you are in the middle of, when you find yourself in one of those uncomfortable situations or conversations, how you can work to get your brain back to that operating from a more reasonable state, or reasoning is the word I'm looking for, not necessarily reasonable. But when we're under stress, which is going to be increased if we're withholding how we really feel and we're carrying around this emotional labor from the conversations that we're not really having, we're going to be more in that fear-based reaction state versus being able to access the part of our brain that can get our words together more quickly and that can respond versus react. So this is what one impact that stress can have as a result of carrying around this unresolved tension that a lot of times we don't want to address. And I'm going to link below in the description a couple of articles that informed my research for this talking point. A lot of times I'll think about challenges and draw on my own lived experience and my own case studies, and then it's fun to research and find, oh, there's a name for this in organizational psychology, and there's actually a lot of research that backs it as well. So I'll drop a couple of those articles below if you want to check them out. But one of them is talking about human needs, and that we all have. So we all want to feel safe. We all want to belong. We want to feel emotionally secure. And so we make our decisions based on emotion, either to achieve these needs or to avoid the things that we don't want as humans. We don't want conflict. A lot of times we work to avoid conflict, which is one reason we don't have these conversations. We don't want to feel rejected. We want to feel accepted. We don't want to risk being punished for speaking up and sharing a challenge. We don't want to negatively impact a relationship dynamic. So we're making our decisions based on these human needs. So we don't want to beat ourselves up if we all sometimes find ourselves on the other side of a conversation where we wish that we would have shown up a little bit differently. And I'm going to give you a framework and some tools today to help you do that moving forward. These are frameworks that I'm practicing myself daily, and I work with my clients on as well. So stick around because I'm going to share those with you here in just a little bit. But psychological safety doesn't mean never having a conflict. It doesn't mean always feeling comfortable. So sometimes we want to do the things that we're afraid of and that make us feel uncomfortable in the moment, so that we can have that comfort, so that we can have the harmony in the relationship in the end. Because unresolved tension is just going to get bigger and bigger the longer that it goes unresolved. Psychological safety can look something like and feel something like just saying, we've got an issue here. Let's work through it. And it can be hard to say, but it's a lot better, I think, to say something, to communicate imperfectly rather than not communicate at all. So it might be a little bit clunky if you're not used to communicating directly or directly addressing a challenge, but the more you do it, the easier it gets. And we'll talk about some ways that you can better prepare yourself to communicate more effectively in the moment, and when you're having those difficult conversations, when you feel like you're under some pressure. So we'll talk about that here in just a little bit. But the higher that your level and your team's level of psychological safety, well, the more comfortable and more likely your team and you are to raise concerns, ask questions, acknowledge mistakes, and disagree. It's okay to disagree, but there's a way to do it respectfully. And that can help you to resolve those challenges faster. But when we instead suppress communication in order to avoid discomfort, it's actually the opposite that is happening. So maybe we had an interaction, but we didn't have the conversation, the real conversation. And again, when that goes on for too long, this can lead to resentment. And think about, we've all felt resentment before. It's not a good feeling. But I want you to think about what's happening when you're with your face, when you're carrying around resentment. I'm very self-aware, and so I focus on that sometimes myself, and I'll notice if maybe I'm out and about running an errand, going for a walk, if I'm replaying a conversation that didn't go very well in my mind, and I'm focusing on that, and I'm starting to feel, maybe a little bit resentful toward that person. Maybe a boundary was crossed. Maybe I'm feeling not understood. Well, what's happening with my face? It's not going to be very inviting. I'm going to be less approachable. And so this is what happens when we're carrying around this unresolved tension. It can impact how you show up day to day with your coworkers, with your team. So awareness is the first step, which we're going to talk about here in just a moment. Yeah, so some examples: replaying a conversation. Maybe we're anticipating another's reaction, so we delay the conversation. Maybe we're worried about how someone perceives us. These are all the things that are going on when we think that we're helping ourselves by avoiding that conversation. We think that we're doing the right thing, either protecting ourselves or protecting the other person. But when we're putting on that mask rather than having the conversation that needs to happen, it impacts your focus, which impacts your ability to be creative, because again, you're working from the stress part of the emotional reactive part of your brain, instead of the part of your brain that can be creative and generate ideas. And so naturally, you're not going to be as effective in your communication and in your decision making. If you think about, when you're dealing with an unresolved problem, it can start to impact your confidence as well. If you haven't listened to how you're really feeling and then dealt with the issue, you start to feel what you're doing is when you're not listening to yourself, you're going against yourself. And so this naturally is going to have an impact on your confidence. And that's going to show up in how you communicate and in how you try to get your point across. And that's going to impact how others then respond and react to you. And at work, what can this look like? This can look like staying silent and not speaking up when you feel like there's something that you want to say, or just pretending like everything's fine when everything is not fine. We're all human. We all have feelings, and sometimes we're not fine. And the only way to get fine is to deal with the feelings. And when they involve others, especially at work, that can be challenging. But this is important to deal with, to have those conversations instead of just interactions, because otherwise it can lead to burnout and emotional detachment. We can just start to avoid the conversation, when we don't feel like connected to a team or somebody in our network, well, then we just start to pull back. And it can also create exhaustion if you're constantly carrying around all of these challenges in the back of your mind that haven't been dealt with, or even just one or two. It can make you tired, cognitively tired, and just harder to focus. All right, time to talk about the solution. So what is the solution? Well, awareness is always the first step. Stopping and paying attention to the discomfort. I like to call it sit with the discomfort or focus on the frustration, because our emotions, especially the not so great feeling ones, the emotions that we want to push away and pretend like are not there. This is why our problems keep surfacing, because they're not solved. Because the first step is awareness, paying attention to the uncomfortable emotion and your internal experience, how you are really feeling. Because when we don't do that and we override, which can be very easy to do in the moment, especially when we're not prepared with a response, which we'll talk about a trick to do that here in a few minutes. Well, then we can easily override ourselves or abandon ourselves in a conversation. Like we can, for example, say yes to a request that we really don't have the bandwidth to do, or that we really don't want to do. And even if you know that you're going to follow up later, I've been guilty of this myself, but now I have a process for moving forward, so I'm prepared, and I'll share that with you. If I just say, oh yeah, sure, that sounds great, knowing that, wait a minute, I'm actually feeling a bit of a pause here. I'm feeling a hesitation faster than my brain can process the feeling and name it, and then even further figure out my words, how I want to respond. It's so easy in the moment to just say, oh yeah, sure. But then later I'm carrying emotional labor, because now I've got to deal with, well, you know what? I didn't actually say how I really felt, because I didn't have my words in the moment. And now I'm worried about how the other person's going to feel. And now I've got to figure out how and when to say, I'm actually not going to be able to do that, and risk disappointing the person, maybe challenging the relationship. So then I'm carrying this frustration with me, and it's distracting my focus as I'm trying to work on my other things. And when we feel we don't want to risk saying no sometimes in the moment, because we don't want to damage that relationship. Very normal desire. So our nervous system is prioritizing protecting ourselves, but we're actually doing the opposite. Then we're feeling stressed, and then we're more likely to use the reactive part of our brain. And then what happens when we do that? We've all done this. We can react defensively. Some of us can shut down, pull away from that relationship, maybe over explain. And when we use more words, then we can end up saying less, if you've ever noticed that. So what's the goal? We don't necessarily want to, well, we definitely don't want to eliminate the emotion, because then that's denying yourselves. The goal is to recognize it. First step is awareness. So you want to pause when you feel that resistance, when you feel that tension. Pause just for a second. And then what you do from there is acknowledge the emotion, which just takes one more second. So this can happen in just a few seconds, where you pause. Okay, I'm feeling some resistance there. And then you acknowledge the emotion, or the what you want or what you don't want. Give yourself just a moment to feel that. And remember, discomfort is data. So a lot of times when we reach for instant gratification, we're not dealing with our problems because we want to feel better. This is human nature. But if you work to shift your perspective around uncomfortable feelings, discomfort, to instead view it as data, as information, then you can use the data to make better decisions and even respond better in the moment, but not when we ignore what's really going on, which is what we're doing, or what we're trying to do when we don't have the difficult conversations. And then when we're carrying this stress, and then our nervous system gets activated, because our nervous system then is scanning for threat. This is what's happening, again, with the amygdala hijacking research. And so this ends up impacting our communication, because your communication changes under stress. And so when we override that signal, that resistance, we can tend to over explain. We can maybe just get silent and not say anything, not say what we really want to say, or maybe just avoid the difficult conversation entirely. And so the first step is to acknowledge, or pause and acknowledge. And then the second step is to acknowledge the feeling. And then what you can do from there is you can clarify. And this is the purpose of clarifying is, well, it serves a lot of purposes, but one, it's going to give you a moment to let your brain, or let your nervous system regulate. That's a lot of times all we need is just that moment, just a second. So how you can clarify, you can repeat back what the other person said. That's such a great trick, because it gives you a moment to calm down, and it gives your brain a moment for the words that you're looking for to actually surface. And then from there, from a more regulated nervous system and state, you can then lead the conversation from there. So that's the framework: pause, acknowledge, clarify, and lead. And you can, if you're in the moment, this process can happen in just a few seconds. And then if it's after, then you can go back and do an after action review. And then you can take a little bit longer with the experience. But what it might look like in the moment is, okay, someone says something that maybe a superior tells you something about your performance that doesn't feel very good. Like maybe, for example, they say, I don't feel like you, or I feel like you lack a sense of urgency. Okay, well, that doesn't feel very good. So you might naturally feel some resistance there. So first pause and notice that, instead of just overriding it and saying something that is not going to end up being very productive or helping to resolve the conflict or the situation. Pause and then acknowledge, okay, it doesn't feel very good. So maybe just by taking one breath, that's enough time to pause and to acknowledge. And then you can clarify by repeating back, if that is such a great way to give yourself just a moment. So you could say, you feel like I lack urgency. That would be an example. Or you can say, okay, I hear you, or what I'm hearing is X, and then you can paraphrase it in your own words. So this lowers your own defenses, and it can also lower the other person's defenses. And then you can lead the conversation from there. Like you could say something like, okay, I hear you. Can you share a specific example? And so now you're going somewhere with the conversation. You're having the conversation. Or you can say something like, okay, I hear you. I understand. Can you, or not I understand, can you help me understand what you're saying specifically? And this way you're showing that you're on board to move forward to resolve the conflict, but you're having the conversation. And then you can lead the conversation to a more constructive direction moving forward. And so it's just pause. It's the main most important step is stopping and listening to yourself. When we don't do that, we end up taking ourselves further and further away from where we want to be. The longer we avoid conflict, the more we are actually going against ourselves, and then the bigger that problem is going to get. And the goal is not perfect communication. It's just more intentional communication. And so don't strive to be perfect. I think it's so much better to speak up, even if it's imperfect, even if it's a bit clunky, even if it's uncomfortable, and it will be a lot of the time. But the more you practice this framework, pause, acknowledge, clarify, lead, and use it to speak up and have the challenging conversations, you're going to strengthen your relationships. Because if we're having any kind of relationship, personal or professional, when we can't speak our mind and say what in a nice way, as nice as possible. Sometimes that's harder than others, but if we can't be honest, then we don't really have a strong relationship there. It's surface level, and we don't really have a connection. And as humans, we want connection at work with the people that we're spending our time with. Doesn't mean we always have to agree, but it's such a great feeling to be able to be yourself and share your feelings and your challenges, even when it's with another person, and still know that that other person accepts you and values your ideas. We want to feel like this at work. And okay, so that's the framework on how you can more easily navigate those difficult conversations in the moment. And then if it's after the fact, a framework that I like to use myself and with clients for after action reviews is an acronym I call SEER. And I'm just focusing on making sure we look at, observe our emotions in the moment. So it stands for situation, emotion, action, result, emotion. So if you had a conversation that didn't go very well, an experience where you didn't show up the way that you necessarily would have liked to, that's okay. You have an opportunity to play it back. And so this way you'll be prepared to moving forward. So it's what was the situation? Go back and look at it. This will just take you like 5 minutes, maybe less, maybe a little bit longer, depending on how much time you want to spend. But what was the situation? And then what was the emotion? How did you feel? And then what action did you take? And then what was the result? And then how did you feel after? This gives you an opportunity to zoom out after the emotions have settled a bit, after the uncomfortable, potentially, conversation. And then you can see, okay, this is a different action that I can take moving forward. And so now you are more prepared. And so you're analyzing your own behavior, you're learning to, by focusing on what was the emotion that you felt, then you're training your brain to pay closer attention to your body, which is giving you those emotions, your intuition, which is pattern recognition, which is processing much faster than you can understand exactly how you're feeling in that moment. For example, no, I actually don't want to do that. You're getting that tightness, that resistance, maybe the discomfort in your stomach. You're feeling it in your body before your brain can process the emotion and then figure out the words. But the more often you do this, the faster you become at it, and you sort of close that window. And then another tool I want to give you, this is something I've been doing recently with myself and with my clients. I'm calling it a response bank. So after you do your after action review, you can come up with, okay, this is the response that I would have said. And that response will probably apply to many different situations. And then I have a little notes section in my phone. I'm just giving away all my secrets here, but wherever you want to write it down. So this way you're prepared. We don't go into meetings unprepared. You don't have to go we can't be prepared for everything fully, meaning we don't yet know how that conversation is going to go, but you can prepare some things that you can say, responses that can help you support yourself in those moments when you feel like a boundary is being crossed. Or maybe some clarifying questions, like, can you give me an example? Okay, I hear you. Thanks for sharing that. Can you give me an example? And so this way you're approaching the conversation with curiosity. So can you give me an example? That's an example of a clarifying question that you could put in your response bank that can work for lots of different situations. One might be, let me think on that. Or that's an idea. Let me get back to you on that. And this way you give yourself some time to follow up. So we have the framework: pause, acknowledge, clarify, lead. We have the after action review using the SEER framework by making sure you're paying attention to your emotions, and this is going to help you pay closer attention to yourself and not override yourself in conversations when you're having that uncomfortable emotion. And then you have your response bank tool so that you can quickly grab, this is what I can say in the moment. And if you get a sense that you're heading into a conversation that is maybe going to be challenging, this is also likely pattern recognition, maybe some signals that you've seen before. Well, now you can prepare for it. And clear communication doesn't have to mean saying everything out loud, but where it starts is becoming aware of your internal experience, your emotions, that resistance. I don't really feel like I'm aligned with this, but you're going to feel the feeling before you process the words. I don't really think I'm aligned with this. All right. And so hopefully these tools can help support you in navigating those difficult conversations, those frustrating moments and dynamics that you can sometimes feel at work. Because what happens is when you stop overriding your instincts in conversations, people, you're going to show up differently, and that means that people are going to start responding to you differently, which is really powerful. Because in taking responsibility and accepting the truth that we only have control over ourselves, that's actually a lot. So maybe we don't like this situation or the way this person is talking to us or something like that. Well, we don't have control over that. So if we spend our time focusing on that, we're just going to feel more frustrated. But you can sort of take your power back by focusing on what you can control, and that is yourself. And hopefully these tools will help with that. So thank you so much for watching. My name's Amy Miller, and these are the kinds of challenges that I work with leaders and teams on. Communication, decision making, and these kinds of issues that can end up quietly impacting team dynamics and ultimately performance inside organizations. And a lot of the work is helping people to communicate more clearly under pressure, navigate those difficult conversations with greater intention. And then you naturally build your confidence and your leadership presence. That's it for this one. I hope you got some value. If you did, actually, I'm going to see if I have, okay, any comments here. Okay, all good there. If you're watching the replay and you have a question or a comment, please drop it below and I'll follow up. And if you got some value, like and subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.